talk about Numbers 9, 1 through 23, which is about God's presence with his people. Okay, so Numbers is broken into two major parts. The first part is the census of the people by tribe, and this is very important to God's people because they knew him by name. He was organizing them to enter the promised land. The second part recounts some of the events that happened during the 40 years God's people depart from Mount Sinai. They had the opportunity to enter the promised land, but when they hear of the dangers, they respond in fear. God chose to delay their entrance for 40 years because he refuses to tolerate their disbelief and distrust. Okay, so in Numbers 9, 1 through 23, this is the year after God's people crossed the Red Sea. To remember their deliverance from Egypt, they observed Passover. Allows for flexibility and observation, welcomes foreigners to participate, and his blessings are spread through Abraham's descendants. And he reminds them of his presence through the cloud and fire over the tabernacle. They were told to observe Passover, which they immediately complied because they trusted the Lord. But eventually Israel fall away, which happens repeatedly during those 40 years. In Numbers 9, verse 14, Passover is not just for the Israelites, but anyone who wants to join God's people, and he calls them sojourners. And at the command of the Lord, the people of Israel set out, and at the command of the Lord they camped. As long as the cloud rested over the tabernacle, they remained in camp. That was it's in Numbers 9, verse 18. So whenever he moved, they moved. It shows their trust of Numbers 9, verses 1 through 23. The Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the first month of the second year after they came out of the land of Egypt, saying, the Israelites are to keep the Passover at the appointed time. On the 14th day of this month at twilight you are to keep it. According to the statutes and regulations you are to keep it. So Moses told the Israelites to keep the Passover. And if you before I continue on. So it says the 14th at twilight. So they continue to do that. They begin Passover at sunset. Okay, from sunset to sunset. So they keep that now. Continue on. So Moses told the Israelites to keep the Passover. They kept the Passover on the 14th day of the first month at twilight in the wilderness of Sinai. And that is not talking about January because at that point they didn't have January. That is probably like March or April. Okay, so the first month is probably about March or April. The Israelites did everything just as the Lord commanded Moses. But there were certain people who were unclean because after having contact with the dead body of a man, so they could not keep the Passover on that day. So they came before Moses and Aaron that day and said to him, we are unclean, having had contact with the dead body of a man. Why are we prevented from offering the Lord's offering at the appointed time among the Israelites? Moses responded to them, wait here until I hear what the Lord commands concerning you. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, tell the Israelites, if any of you or your descendants are unclean, having had contact with a dead body, or having gone a distant journey, they may still keep the Passover to the Lord. So he made an exception for this first Passover. Okay. In the 14th day of the second month at twilight, they must keep it. They will eat the Passover lamb. So Passover lamb, because remember when God passed over, he had them put lamb's blood, and then this is going to be significant because Jesus is known as the Lamb of God, okay, with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. And they still, with Passover, they still eat the lamb, they still have that unleavened bread, and they still eat bitter herbs, okay? They must not leave any of it until morning or break any of its bones. They must keep it following every statute of the Passover. But the person who is clean and has not been on a journey and fails to keep Passover, that person must cut off from his people because he has not offered the Lord's offering at the appointed time. The person will bear consequences of his sin. If a foreigner living among you wants to keep the Passover to the Lord, he must do so in accordance with the statute and regulations of the Passover. You are to have the same statute for both the foreigner and for the one who is born in the land. On the day that the tabernacle was set up, the cloud covered the tent of the testimony, and from evening until morning it was over the tabernacle looking like fire. This is how it always was. The cloud covered it, and at night it had the appearance of fire. Whenever the cloud lifted off the tent, then the Israelites would set out, and in the place where the cloud settled, there the Israelites set up camp. So it's like a little dance going on. I think I've read this before, but that's fine to start again. At the commandment of the Lord, the Israelites began their journey, and at the commandment of the Lord, they set up the camp. As long as the cloud stayed over the tabernacle, they would remain camped. Even when the cloud stayed over the tabernacle many days, the Israelites followed the Lord's order and did not set out on a journey. Sometimes the cloud was only a few days over the tabernacle. So according to the Lord's command, they remained camped, and according to the Lord's command, they set out. Sometimes the cloud remained only from evening until morning, and when the cloud was taken up the next morning, they continued on. Whether by day or by night, when the cloud was lifted, they set out. Whether it was 2 days or a month or a year, that the cloud remained over the tabernacle, resting on it, the Israelites remained camped and did not set out. But when it lifted, then they set out. At the command of the Lord, they set up camp, and the commandment of the Lord they traveled. They kept the charge of the Lord at the commandment of the Lord through Moses.